Hi, welcome to episode 13 of SmugMug Live. It is Friday. It's episode 13. What could possibly go wrong, right? I'm not one to be superstitious, so we're all good. Today, we've got an exciting episode today, so I'm going to jump straight to it because I believe Arron Nace is with us. Arron, hi, how are you?
I'm just adjusting my hair under this
Gotta look good,
headphones.
I'll do the same, shall I? I'll adjust my. How are
I'm
you?
doing I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Excellent.
It's
So
gonna be a blast.
delighted to have you here today. Aaron is from an incredible website that many of you should know, which is Phlearn, an incredible place where you can learn all the skills you need to know about Photoshop. There's stuff there on frequency separation, HDR, lots of pro stuff, but there's also lots and lots and lots of free content over there where you can get, learning about Photoshop very quickly with all the stuff. And you've been doing this for a while now, right?
It's almost 10 years now, and
10
believe
years?
it believe it or not, we've been releasing at least one free video a week, every single week for almost 10 years.
Wow, that is a lot of content, a lot of content. What people, might not know, but Aaron you really are considered the kind of premier educator when it comes to Photoshop in this industry. We've all known you for a long time. We've all utilized the classes and the lessons that you've given us. As photographers, you've given us so much free content, which is amazing. Many of us have learned the basics and progressed through our careers. I'm super excited to have you here today. I can't tell you, it's so fun. It's been a while since we've been together, and it maybe a little while until we're back together. But it's great to have you here.
Well, it'll happen again. We'll get to see each other in person.
Yeah.
There, I'm sure sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. So, first of all, a few little housekeeping things. Obviously, we're super stoked to have you here on the show today. But in order that you don't miss out on any of the shows that we've got coming up, please hit the little subscribe logo on the YouTube channel here and hit that little bell notification. That way you'll be notified anytime we're launching a new episode, and we've got lots coming up next week. We have an episode on Tuesday all about our own SmugMug products, some tips and tricks there. On Wednesday, I'm going to be joined by one of our great ambassadors, Chris Burkhardt, which is really exciting. And then on Friday, I'm going to be joined for a conversation with Peter Dering, who is the founder of Peak Design. So an exciting week coming up next week. But today's all about Aaron and all about learning some Photoshop. So before we get started, what have you got in store for us today?
We're going to be doing Photoshop Essentials today, which I'm super excited about. Basically, these are tools and techniques. We've just got a couple of them that I feel are going to make the biggest impact on your images as a photographer. So we're going to be editing photos today, but they're relatively simple tools we're going to be covering. I just want to show everyone the kind of the capability of these tools, because tools, even like the brush tool, you look at the brush tool and you're like, what is that? Good, I can paint, red on my image, but you can actually do a lot more with these simple tools. So we're going to be going over things like curves and levels, and just like how many different ways you can use those tools to improve your image quality.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be talking about layer masks and the different ways you can use layer masks to either hide or show any part of your layers. We're going to show some object removal, general image cleanup, things like getting rid of distractions in your images. And then we're also going to show some exposure blending. So if your part of your image is too bright or too dark, we're going to show you how to fix that. And then we're going to show you some little bit of like sunset type coloring. So how to like add more like light and color into your photos, give them a little bit more of like an artistic kind of romantic feel.
Okay, well, that already sounds like a lot of content. So we're going to be here for about the next hour doing that. Aaron has kindly sent me a link to the files you're going to be working on today. So I am going to post a wee transfer link in the chat window where you can actually go and download those files if you wanted to follow along with us today. Hopefully it works in the chat window, but I'll try that in a moment, and you can maybe work alongside Arron as he teaches us those tips and tricks and essentials. One thing I always love is give us a shout out in the chat window where you're joining us from today. It's always nice to see people around the world joining us. And of course, if you have any questions during Arron's demonstration, then I will be sure to get those questions to him. After his presentation, we'll do a Q&A at the end. Does that sound like how we should approach things? Get your questions in. After he's finished, I'll throw all those questions at him. So the more you get in, the longer we keep Arron here, right?
yeah. Keep me around as much as you possibly can.
Hey, it's Friday evening almost here, so not going to stay around too long. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
Nowhere to go.
In the morning for me.
Yeah, nowhere to go here in Scotland. So still under lockdown. So might as well educate and let our community be part of what we're doing here at SmugMug Live. It's all the part of it. We're already getting shout outs in the channel about how people are huge Phlearn fans. Arron is awesome. There you go. I don't see any Alistair is awesome yet, but nobody knows me, so that's fine.
Alistair is awesome. I know you. I have first-hand experience.
Well, don't say too much. Right, we should probably get to things. And you're going to share your screen with me. Are you already doing that? Let's see.
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Okay, let me just get things sorted on my end. There's a lot of buttons to press today to make sure Arron can share his screen. Looks good. Right, let's see. Boom. Right. Okay, we can see your screen, which is great. So fantastic. I will get over to you. I will play devil's advocate here in the background, so you'll hear my voice as I say, hang on, wait a minute. You just did what? And we'll get him to maybe slow down a little bit. I'm going to keep you in the top right-hand picture, top right-hand corner of the Photoshop. It's just his navigation bar that's up there, so I won't be hiding too much. But yeah, over to you, Arron. Thank you so much for this.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you through this hanging out in Photoshop with friends and editing. It's really, really fun. So here's our image for today. Now, we're actually using images from Unsplash, which is a free stock image website here. So I believe we can provide a link to some of the images we're going to be using today in the chat.
Yeah, I'm just going to post those in there now. Hopefully they can click on that link in the chat.
There we go. That's just a WeTransfer link, but all these are available for free on Unsplash as well. So they're, it's a stock image website that you can use images for free, which is very, very helpful. So we're going to get started with some object removal here. Just kind of going over, this is usually the first step that I do when editing an image. And the reason is you can make a huge impact on an image just by removing little distractions. And it always surprises me just how big of a difference you can make. So I like to start these processes out with just kind of highlighting the things that I feel are just a little bit distracting, So I'm going to do this with you guys just by circling these things live here. Just got like a green marker and all these like steps in the sand and things like that. It's just a little bit distracting. I'm still at a relatively zoomed out level here. So we're going to do a little bit zoomed out, and then we're going to zoom in a little bit too. Let's see, these little loops on our subject's clothes here just kind of stick out. The ones in line don't bother me at all because they kind of blend in, but these ones kind of hanging out there, a little bit distracting. We have a little bit of an area that's kind of like, it's just a little bit messy with clothing. It's one of the things that we're always going to encounter with clothing is, you've got folds and wrinkles and creases and things like that. And a lot of that sort of thing is actually pretty easy to fix in Photoshop. So we're going to show you how to do some of that too. The shape of her blouse or shirt, I don't know. What would you call this, Alistair?
Yeah, let's go with shirt.
Shirt. Okay, I wasn't sure if there was like a Scottish term for you know.
Scottish down blouse. Yeah, probably blouse shirt. We're going on a tangent. Let's get on.
There we go. So here we go. We're this hair. We're going to go ahead and just to kind of do this, remove some of that, and yeah, kind of take care of that. So she's got a little bit of hair on her face as well. So those are like just general distractions that we're going to start off by removing. So let's go ahead. We're going to create a new layer here. I prefer to do everything on a new layer whenever possible. That way I can just turn that layer off and on if I need to. So my first go-to tool for object removal is the Spot Healing Brush tool. And this tool is fantastic because literally you could just paint over whatever you want gone. And the tool uses basically AI or machine learning or some sort of fancy computer term to figure out what it should fill it with. It basically analyzes the rest of your image and figures out, okay, this is what I think it should look like. And it's automatic. Like, you don't have to sample anything. You don't have to guess. You don't really have to do any work. Basically, you just paint over the thing that you want gone, and it, for the most part, does a really good job. Now, it's not always going to be 100% perfect because it is one of those automatic tools. So I'll show you guys a few things that you can do in the use case where it doesn't do exactly what you want. See, like in that case, it just duplicated that belt loop right there. And we obviously don't want that. So I'm just going to hit undo. We'll come back to that little area near her clothes in just a second. All right.
That's definitely changed from when healing first came about, because you used to always have to sample somewhere and tell it what you wanted to use as the sample to heal. Right now, it just chooses automatically where it's going to bring the sample in from.
It does it for you. And again, it does a really good job, but it's not perfect, right? So I always recommend, starting with this tool because it'll just kind of get the majority of the work done, but then going in and kind of refining it. As you can see down here, it's starting to look like it looks a little bit blocky here. Like, it doesn't look like a smooth gradient of sand right here, right? And so that's where we want to jump into our next tool for object removing, and this is just the regular healing brush tool. So with the regular healing brush tool, you actually do sample the area of texture that you want. So super easy, just hold Alt or Option and sample. So I'm going to sample from this area right up here because it's just a really smooth area of sand. So I'm going to sample there and then paint right over top of, see these areas that were a little bit blocky. And I'm on a new layer here, so you'll see me create a bunch of layers as we go along. And the reason I do that is because it gives me a lot of flexibility. I can turn these layers off and on at any time. So it's a very easy way to kind of have undo always at your fingertips. You can just turn the layer off. There we go. So we can see that's looking really, really good. I'll just turn this back off and on. So you can see this is kind of the results from the Spot Healing Brush tool. So this is our before we did anything. Then we have our Spot Healing Brush tool and then the regular Healing Brush tool. Clean that up quite a bit. So the next area that we have is right here next to our subject's dress. And I'm going to create a new layer because I'm going to show you guys a common issue that we have when removing things. So let's go ahead and sample out here next to, out here in the sand, and then try paint it on the dress. And you're going to see this really just doesn't work. And the reason is because we have a hard edge there. So the healing brush is trying to basically take some of the color from the left side of the dress and some of the color from the right side of the dress and blend those two together, which in sand or in the middle of a person's face, when you have the same color all around, that's actually perfect. But when you have an edge like this, it doesn't work. So we're going to move on to our next tool, which is the clone stamp tool. And I do recommend using these tools in this order. So start off with the Spot Healing Brush, then do some cleanup with the regular healing brush, and then if you need to, if you've got edges that aren't cooperating with you, then you want to move into the regular clone stamp tool.
And you do all those in separate layers, each one of those?
I do, because I can always merge these later. It's super easy to merge them, but look, I can just turn these off and on, and that to me is more powerful than undo, because undo is really great. But let's say I close this file down and open it again, my undo is completely wiped. But if I've got all this, saved as different layers, I can, my client says, actually, I really like the footprints in the sand. I don't gotta go redo that. I just turn those layers off and I'm good to go again, So now what we want to do is take care of this area right here. But we run into one more slight issue here. So I'm going to use my clone stamp tool. So we hold Alt or Option, and I'm just going to clone stamp right to the very edge. And basically, this just requires a little bit of precision with my clone stamp tool. Now you can make selections to help that process along a little bit better using like the path tool, the pen tool, or even like the lasso tool or magnetic lasso tool. So those type of things can really help out. You can also, check this out, this is super cool. You can also use the clone stamp tool. So I'm just going to clone stamp this dress over here. So again, on a new layer, you can see we just started and I've already got 6 layers, right? But I'm going to group them together and stay super organized. So don't worry about having a bunch of layers. So check this out. I'm going to actually clone stamp this area of the dress right here. So hold Alt or Option. I'm going to sample that area. There we go. And then I'm just going to paint it right over here. Okay. Because what I want from this area is I want this to be over here. Because you see this like dark shadow? That's a little shadow that's there because we have that loop in the clothing right there. Mm-hmm. But I don't want that because I've removed the loop. So I've just clone stamped this right over here. But keep in mind, I'm on a new layer now. So if I grab my Move tool, I can just move that around. I can move it anywhere I want, right? So let's just go ahead and lower the opacity of it a little bit. And I'm just going to put this over here. And now I'm going to hit Control or Command T for transform and hold Control and just click here. See how I can kind of just stretch and move this around now? So I can just kind of put that right there where I want it. All right, maybe go a little bit higher so we don't have a repeating polka dot. And hit Enter. Now I increase the opacity. There we go. And then I just put a layer mask on that. And a layer mask allows you to either hide or show certain parts of your layer. There we go. So this, we kind of, fix that little area. And I realize these are small details here, but I want to show you guys how these tools work because it's super helpful. But we just fixed that little area literally just from clone stamping from right down there. So that was, when I got started in Photoshop, that was actually one of the things that I struggled with a lot. I was like, okay, I want to remove that thing. I'm going to clone stamp it over here, and then let me try to put it over here. But look, it's like changing the shape of it. It's like it's not aligning perfectly, and it's not in the right rotation. So my recommendation, if your clone stamp tool just like isn't working the way you want, just do it on a new layer. Make sure with your clone stamp tool that up here at the very top you have sample, current, and below. So it's going to sample this layer and everything under it. Put it on a new layer and then use the transform to just put it in the right place.
That's cool. Because typically we're looking at cloning stuff out, whereas you actually used it to clone stuff in there and then use that as an asset to cover up an error. That's cool. Never done that.
Exactly. You can do that with so many different things. So we'll just go ahead and do that. In this case, again, we'll just clone stamp this little guy out here. Now, again, you can definitely make a selection around the edge of this dress just to ensure that, you have a nice hard edge. Or what I will often do, especially if I'm just kind of like working on something that's maybe a little bit low impact, like this, area on her dress. Here's the deal. If you have a brush, so let me just choose a large soft edge brush. So we're just going to paint green. I'll just do this on her shirt. So with a large soft edge brush, you can see the edge is very soft, right? But if I just make this brush smaller, all I did was make it smaller. You can see already we have a built-in harder edge because it's just a smaller brush. So when I'm going to clone stamp or do any type of work here, like this loop here, I can use a larger brush for the majority of it. That's totally fine, But if I want like a more well-defined edge, all I do is just make my brush smaller, and I've got that well-defined edge already built into the brush. So it just allows me to make sure that I can match the edge from one area to another without having, I pretty much never change the hardness of my brush. I'm always just making it smaller. And I, for the most part, I leave my brush hardness at 100% just about all the time. I can make it larger and smaller, and that basically solves the same problem. So you can see we've got a nice, well-defined edge right there as well. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to hold Shift and click on those layers there and hit Control-Command-G to group them together. So you can see we just started here, but let's take a look at that before and after. So there's the before and the after, and already such a clean image, right? Instead of looking at all this stuff, because what happens in images, right? Like as a viewer, like we're all viewers of this photo, right? Like we're looking at it. You want to basically be looking at this, right? Like that. Yeah. That's the focal point of the image, right? A person's face. And when people are in your photos, most of the time it's going to be their faces. That's the focal point. And within the faces, it's usually going to be the eyes, right? So that's basically where I want all of my attention to go as a viewer, and all this other stuff just kind of helps tell the story. But I want to be looking there. So when you have all this kind of distractions and stuff like this in your image, basically your eyes just starts like jumping around, like what's that down there? What's that down there? And especially if they're like, you know, at the very edges of your image, like way up here, things like that, it's going to pull your attention away. And as soon as you remove that, instantly, I'm looking at my subject's face. So that alone, if you do nothing but just some general cleanup and some object removal, what we just showed you, I think you'll experience a big difference in how your images are perceived. But we got more for you, so let's keep on going.
Cool.
So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to just jump into the spot healing brush tool once more. Okay, and we're just going to remove a couple of these flyaway hairs. Now she's on the beach and it's windy, so I'm not trying to make this like a studio, you know, shampoo commercial where every single hair is in the exact right place, right? But we're just going to remove some of these bigger flyaway hairs where it's just a little bit distracting, this thing here too. So again, just pretty quick and easy. Nothing that, you know, takes that much time. You just want to make sure. So I got a little bit of artifacts going on where it didn't quite blend together. So then we just jump to our regular healing brush tool. And always with a super soft edge brush. There we go. And then sometimes if you do this, hair can kind of just like, you can see this hair just kind of like goes up here and then just ends.
Just goes to a dead end, yeah.
It just goes to a dead end, right? Which is usually just doesn't happen. So you can take care of that in a number of ways. You can clone stamp hair from either the same image or an existing image. And you can even just use the brush tool to just kind of paint in some more hair, which is what I'm going to show you how to do now. So we talked about earlier today how simple tools like the brush tool are actually incredibly useful. So we're just going to use the brush tool to paint some hair. So first suggestion I have when you're going to do anything like this is to hit R on your keyboard for rotate. And that allows me to simply rotate my canvas around. Now, this is not the same thing as flipping your image around. This is just rotating my view of the image, okay? Because I can always go right back where I was. Now, the reason that I'm going to rotate my canvas around is because I'm using a pressure-sensitive tablet right now. So let me just put this up here. This is a Wacom Intuos small pressure-sensitive tablet here. And whether you're using a tablet or you're using a mouse, you're always going to have a way to draw that's more comfortable than another. Like for me, this is comfortable, right? That's comfortable. If I'm using a mouse, let's just pick up a mouse. This motion is comfortable too. right?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, if I try to paint like this, like going that way, it's unnatural for my hand to do that.
Yeah.
So what I do instead, and this is just like drawing on a piece of paper, like you can move a piece of paper around and around to like draw lines in a way that's comfortable for you. So I'm basically just doing the same thing here in Photoshop with the rotate tool. So
how did you get to that rotate tool?
it just hit R on your
R?
keyboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, yeah, it's also right here. It's under, if you go right here in your toolbar, it's the Rotate View tool is the name of it. Rotate View tool. It's right next to the magnifying glass, the zoom tool.
That's what that one does.
Yeah, yeah. You can type in a rotation angle here at the top. You can hit Reset View at the top here. It'll put you right back how it was before. And you can also hold down Shift, and it'll keep you going by 15-degree increments. So you can kind of rotate it around here, and then when you're ready, just hold Shift and rotate it right back up. You get this little compass here, which really helps out, so you know your orientation there. So we're going to go just rotate this around, and then on a new layer, we're going to use a brush tool. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and sample colors from, there we go, sample colors from the hair. And I'm just doing this, you know, basically just painting in a little circle here, painting in my own, you know, I'm giving the hair a new shape. So the hair is going to go back that way. So there's the before and the after. Let's go ahead and rotate it right around here. There we go. So there's our before and the after. And you can see that's pretty quick. You know, you don't have to take that much time to do it. And I recommend just using a small brush like hair, just kind of paint some hair. And then you want to go ahead and grab your blur tool. So the blur tool looks like a little water drop. That is fantastic for making hair look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to do this on the same layer. So I can turn this layer off and on. And then up here where it says sample all layers, just make sure that's not checked for this, because I just want to blur this layer. So I just paint over this a couple little, you know, the more times you paint with the blur tool, the more it blurs, right? So there we go, we're done. So turn that off and back on, and now we have a little bit more of a natural extension with the hair. And you can do this with so many things. So let's just hit R for the rotate tool. Like if you wanted to fill in some detail, there we go. We'll just do this here too. I'm just literally painting, I'm painting little circles basically, because on the inside of the hair, it's not visible at all, right? So you don't have to worry about that. But let me just show you what I'm painting here. So I'm going to grab my move tool and just move that around. So literally, it's not fancy, you know. It's like.
Could you do that for me? I think I'm going to get you to just permanently Photoshop all that onto my head.
Oh man, I would.
Move on.
Yeah. I was gonna say I'd be a rich man if I could just draw a hair in real life, man.
Absolutely.
So there we go. So I just painted this right over here. Let's hit undo to put it right back where it was. So there's the before and the after. So anytime you have little like gaps in hair, you just want to make it look a little bit more full, or you know, something that it's just not, you know, maybe you have a distraction with a gap, or you're like, you know, there's so many different use cases for this, and I use it all the time. And this is not really just like a, you know, like a hack that you got to feel bad about. Professional retouchers use this technique very, very frequently. This is an actual legit technique that is very commonly used, and if you're compositing photos, this is something that's used quite a bit too, because hair can be relatively difficult to cut out. So painting new hair is a real technique. So I'll just move that over there so you guys can see that's like literally just what I painted. It's nothing special there. Oops, put the wrong tool there. But let's just turn this off and on, and you can see I was able to fill in those gaps in the hair. Okay, and then we just go back in here with the blur tool, paint over it just a little bit of back and forth until it blends in, and you know, can't really tell that I did that, you know. Go back and maybe just clean up these lines a little bit more. Just add a couple more of these. There we go. And you can even just fill in this whole thing if you wanted. If you're like, ah, that gap there's a little bit. There we go. Today's broadcast is called How to Paint Hair. So let's just turn that off and on, and you can see, we'll go with both of these. So we'll just go ahead and group these together. So I really like to stay organized as well as I possibly can. So it's now time to start organizing. So I create a bunch of layers, but then I just group them together. And you just double click on this group and call that hair. All right, and then we'll just call this object removal. So layers do add up pretty quick, but as soon as you start grouping them together, you can see it's no longer that big of a deal. Okay, so here's our before. Object removal, turn that on. Hair, turn that on. So the other reason I'm creating layers here consistently is that I can get back to my original photo at any time. I don't have to restart. So it gives me a lot more possibilities. If I don't like something that I did with the hair, I just turn that off and try it again. You know, I don't have to try it. I don't have to lose any of my work. Okay, well, there's our focal point. We already know about that. I just delete that layer. Let's take a look at some of the other distractions. So a lot of those distractions we've already gotten rid of. Now it's time to see what we can do with some clothing here, right in this little crease there. So we're going to go ahead and grab a new layer, and we're going to just grab, again, starting with our spot healing brush tool. So same idea here. All right, and you don't need to be super zoomed in for this. In fact, it's sometimes a little bit better to be zoomed out. I think that's one of the big mistakes that I made starting out, was I would try to zoom in real close and see if I could take care of all the tiny, tiny little details in my photo. But the thing is, most people are going to be viewing your photo from further out, you know, especially if it's going to be on a phone or something like that. So if you're very, very far zoomed into your photo while you're editing, it's actually going to do you a disservice. It's actually a little bit better to work a little bit further zoomed out. All right, so let's see if we can take care of this area here too. My goal here is to kind of clean this up. Okay, so now we're left with something like this, which, like, admittedly doesn't look good at all, right? So what we need to do is then again, that's step number one, right? Step number two is we go back in with our regular healing brush tool, okay? And here's where we start to actually tell it, hey, this is the texture, this is what I want it to look like, you know. We're dictating a little bit more control here. So I'm sampling from the area that I want and trying to get it pretty similar in terms of light quality and texture. For instance, the texture on the back part of my subject here, okay, versus this, well, that looks like it's a different material. But if I sample this texture over here and then paint it over here, I don't want to zoom in too close because YouTube is using AI to figure out, I don't know, if you include too much skin, it can shut off your broadcast for some reason.
We've experienced that a few times.
yeah. So we're not going to get super close here, but I'll just show you here. Technically, this is the same fabric here on the back part of my subject. But if I sample this and paint it over here, you can see that the texture doesn't match at all, right? Yeah. Because when you have a texture in highlight, you're going to see more of that texture. When it's in shadow, you're going to see less of the texture. It's just basically how light works. So again, here, what I want to do is I want to sample from an area that has a similar light level, not just similar fabric, but similar light level from before. There we go. So sampling this here, and then we have our little edge here, right? We got that edge, and that's time for the clone stamp tool. So anytime you got the edge, that's when you want to grab a clone stamp tool. So again, very similar techniques to what we were just using. There we go. And on a new layer, S for the clone stamp tool. And now we have this little fold right there. So I'm going to sample right over here and simply paint over top of that fold. Again, just holding Alt or Option There we go. And I've got a little preview of where it's actually going to paint with my clone stamp tool as well. Fantastic. And then this, now we have a little bit of a crease. This is going to be kind of cool. I'm going to use the pen tool. So P for the pen tool. We're basically going to make a selection right around her arm. So something like this. And then we're going to kind of come up right there and then go right around there. So basically, I'm just making a selection here with the pen tool. It's this area right here that I'm highlighting. That's all that I care about with this. The rest of it is just, I just need a closed loop. So what we're going to do is make a selection. I'm going to right click and say make a selection. All right, we're going to go ahead and feather this by 1 pixel. Okay, so once you make a selection in Photoshop, basically that restricts where you can work. So now, if I just grab my brush tool, you can see I can only change what's inside of that selection. Okay, if you inverse the selection, you can go to select and then to inverse. Now I can paint everywhere outside of that selection. So it's super cool. So what we're going to do is hit Control or Command H, and that's going to hide the selection. So it's actually still active. So you can see the selection's still active, but it's just hidden a little bit. And then we're going to use the brush tool to make this transition from shadow to highlight a little bit more believable. So again, just B for the brush tool. We're just going to use a large soft edge brush, and then check this out. See how I'm just painting right there ever so subtly? There we go. This is literally just the brush tool I did that with. Now we're going to change our layer from normal down to multiply. Okay? There we are. And then we'll just deselect. I'm going to pop a layer mask on that and just paint it away where I don't want it to be. Or I can just paint a little bit more subtle. So we'll just paint it more subtle. So literally I just extended this crease right up there in a very natural looking way. Super, super easy with the brush tool. So literally just painted that shadow detail right in there. So this is one of the fun things that, you know, I think that when I was first starting out, I was always looking for kind of like advanced tools to do this sort of thing. And then when I realized that basically you can just use the brush tool for a lot of these little details, it really changed how I worked in Photoshop. So again, I just started off making a selection, grabbing the brush tool, and then kind of painting that in there. And then I just, you know, put a little bit of shadow in there as well to kind of round that area out.
Very cool.
Let's go ahead and group that together. So there's our before and the after with the shirt, right? Like, that looks pretty dang good. I'm pretty happy with that. It didn't take that long. Let's just call this shirt. So again, the tools that we used here, we started out with the spot healing brush tool. Then we went to the regular healing brush tool. And then we used the clone stamp tool for that edge there. And then I just used the brush tool. And we used the pen tool to make a selection. So really, we're just using these like basic tools. These are, you know, this is why we're calling this Photoshop Essentials. It's not let's use every tool and every filter and every menu item. This is, I want to show everyone how much editing you can do with just the basic tools. Okay, now we are going to throw in the liquefy tool because it's awesome. And it's really good for things like clothing. Okay, so earlier we talked about the folds in the fabric here. Let me just go ahead and save this out here. There we go. Just a general habit, good habit to go ahead and save every few minutes, especially if you're going to use a more advanced tool like the liquefy tool, because it's a bit more computer intense. So Photoshop is a very stable program, but if it is going to crash, it's going to crash when you use intense filters and things like that, and liquefy is one of those. So I always save before I use the liquefy tool. That's just, it's been ingrained for me for years.
I'd love to do a show of hands in the comments, but we can't do it just now. But it's like, I'm sure we've all had that moment of having spent hours and many, many layers, and suddenly it gets a little bit draining on the system, and it's all gone. We've all been there for sure. So save regular.
Especially during a live broadcast. Yeah. So let's go ahead and we're going to liquefy this area. Now, there's one thing that's a little bit tricky about it's not tricky, it's just a limitation with the liquefy tool, is you can't do it on a blank layer. Like if I go to filter and down to liquefy, okay, it's just going to tell me, hey, there's nothing on this layer. What are you going to liquefy, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do an apply image command. And this is incredibly useful for many, many situations. Basically, it just takes your image as you have it and just pops it on a new layer. So super easy to do. Just go to image and down to apply image. So it's, think about it, we're literally applying the image onto this layer. So right down here to apply image, and then your layer, you just want to choose merged. Okay, so it's gonna keep all your layers. It's not actually gonna merge the layers, but it's going to take a merged view and put that on your new layer. So layer, you want to be merged there, and then blending, we're just gonna pop to normal, and then hit OK. So you can actually see right here in my thumbnail, basically we just have a copy of my image. And if I zoom out, let's go ahead and grab our move tool. This is now what's on the layer. It's literally just it's like a copy of everything, but it contains all the changes that we made, right? So if I turn it off and on, it looks like there's nothing on the layer, but there is. It's literally just my whole image. Okay, so now we have something that we can liquefy. So I'm gonna grab my marquee tool, okay? Let's just grab our marquee tool. I'm gonna go ahead and make this a selection right here of the area that I want to liquefy. And here's my other tip, especially if you find that the liquefy is a little bit too intense for your computer. I don't actually need the liquefy tool to load all of this information, right? I'm actually only interested in liquefying a certain area. So I've made a selection of the area that I want. Then we're just going to inverse the selection. So we're going to go to select and then to inverse, and then I just hit the delete button, and it just gets rid of it all. So this is just going to make it a lot less computer intense. So now all I have on this layer is just this. So it's processing a lot less information. It's going to be easier on the computer, faster process, and it's going to lower your file size for your final rendered file anyway. Okay, so now we're good to go. We just go to filter and then down here to liquefy, and we can see it brings up our liquefy. Now you have a couple of view options here. You can decide to show the backdrop or not. I'm going to uncheck that, but you can see this is just my image. This is all I need to work on here. Just make this a little bit bigger for everyone. Okay, now within the liquefy there are a lot of tools and a lot of options, but most of the time, and I'm speaking 90% of the time, I'm just using this forward warp tool at the very top left. Okay, it's the forward warp tool. W is the keyboard command. And this is, you think about it just like pushing and pulling pixels around. So my next suggestion with the liquefy tool is start off with a big brush and then get smaller as you need to. Okay, because if you just start with a small brush and start pushing things around, let me just bring up my pressure a little bit, start pushing things around at a really small size, you're going to wind up with something that's kind of uneven, right? It's just, now it looks like I've made this worse, right? It's just, I'm exaggerating this obviously, but the small brush, not as good. By the way, if you do something you don't like, this reconstruct tool right under this, hit R, you could just paint that and it literally will just go back to where it was before. So that's really helpful too. Okay, so forward warp brush, start off bigger. Start off bigger because this whole area in her clothing, I just want to push that in. So big brush, and we just push that in. See how this looks smooth and natural? And then this area, there we go, pull that out. And then that one, push it in. Now, don't push it up because look what's happening to the ocean behind it, right? So you got to make sure, if you got stuff behind you there, you got to make sure to kind of flow with that a little bit better, right? That's a super important step there.
Arron Nace literally turned back the tide there.
That was cool. There we go. So now we make a brush a little bit smaller, and we come in here and kind of clean this up. I don't want this to be like perfectly straight there, like, you know, because it's clothing, it's fabric, right? We want some bend and some folds and things like that in it. So it should have a little bit of it, but we can kind of just take it down a little bit. Super easy. Now, there's one more option that I really suggest checking out here, and it's at the very bottom of the right-hand side, and that's brush reconstruct options. So go ahead and click on this reconstruct, and you're going to get a little slider that says revert reconstruction. This is very helpful because it's basically like a undo, but you have steps. So it's not off or on, you can tone it down. So we can just take this slider and bring it down and see the original, and bring it up and see what we've done. This will work with any liquify that you've done. So you can decide, hey, did I do this too much? You know what I mean? Like, this is the before, this is what we did. If you think, oh, maybe I did it a little bit too much, just bring it back, you know, maybe 80%, hit OK, and you're good to go. So let's hit OK on that. And it went ahead and applied that to my image. So we'll just turn this off and on, and we can see just pulled those in a little bit. Not, again, all these changes are relatively small. We're just pulling those in a little bit. Alrighty, we're gonna create one more layer, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and spot heal this little. There we go. This little bit of hair away from my subject's face. Healing brush tool or the spot healing brush tool would work. You don't want to use the clone stamp tool for this because the clone stamp creates an exact copy. And that really, these days, I really just use the clone stamp tool for edge work. You know, like we did earlier where we had the edge of our dress. That's really the, I won't say the only time, but it's mostly, most of my use cases with the clone stamp tool. Okay, so there we go. Let's go ahead and just turn all this off and back on again. So we can see we're left with a much cleaner image. Very nice focal point. Looks like someone came and raked all the sand before we got there, you know. Very, very cool. And just using nice and simple tools. So we went over object removal. We did some work with our layer masks. I wanted to show you guys some things you can do with curves and levels as well.
Just before you move on, can I ask a couple of questions that come in?
Please do.
Relevant?
Yeah, please
do.
Let's
see, Chili Sayeni, what brush settings did you use again for the hair? When you were painting in the hair, what were the settings you had on Photoshop?
Yeah, good question. So again, I've just been using the same, it's a soft edge brush. So there we go. So we got a big brush here. If you just make it really small, you got a hair, you know, a brush that looks like hair. So I'm still using, it's a hardness of 0. I'm just going smaller with it, and you kind of got hair. So again, I leave the hardness at 0 all the time. This is my personal workflow. There's no right or wrong in Photoshop, but for personal, you know, the way that I use Photoshop, I only change my brush size. I never change the hardness, but what I do change is my flow a lot. I change the brush flow. If I want something to be a little bit more subtle, I'll put the flow down to like 10%, something like that. If I want it to be a little bit stronger, I'll bring the flow up to 70%. So I do change my flow and I change my size, but I leave the hardness at always consistent. Cool. So just larger and smaller.
Yeah, so not a specific brush style or texture, literally just the size of the brush to make it thin, as thin as hair, which is cool.
Yeah, because I'm painting individual hairs, so you just need a tiny brush.
Yeah. And then another question here from Jose, who said he's curious about how you would approach the hair right at the border of the image. So the hair that's coming right to the edge of the frame on the right there in the rocks.
Yes.
He's wondering how he'd approach that. I guess also trying to avoid dead ends, you know, just cutting the hair off there, right? What would your approach there be?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, let's just do it.
It's an interesting question. Thanks, Jose. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jose. Good questions. All right, so let's just do it. That's, you know, that's the most fun, is just like get in there and figure it out. So first thing that I'm going to do is I just need to get rid of the end of the hair, right? So we're just going to use our spot healing brush tool to start this off. It's giving me a little bit of, you can see how it's trying to blur the two together. So I'm like, okay, not going to do that. So then we pop in here with the clone stamp tool. So clone stamp tool, and we're going to sample our current and below layers. Okay, there we go. And this is just going to give me a little bit more. First, I need to clear some of this hair away, right? That's my first goal, is go ahead and get some of that hair gone and create a realistic background behind it. In fact, it's so blurred, I'm going to use the brush tool. It's, again, I think one of the most underrated tools in Photoshop, the brush tool. Just think about like classical painters, you know, they can paint masterpieces with a paintbrush, and you can do the same thing in Photoshop. So, you know, that brush tool is always there for you when you need it, you know, and especially if something's out of focus like this, that's the easiest thing in the world to paint. You know, just paint a brown blob, paint a black blob, you know, it's super easy.
Happy little brown blob.
Yeah. A happy little brown blob, exactly. Okay, so now I'm going to show you one more technique that's super cool. We're going to go to a new layer. I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to actually just sample some of this hair over here. So we'll just sample this hair. I'll paint it right over there. Okay, so this is just with my clone stamp tool. So now I've just got some hair over there. But check this out. If I put it over here, okay, it's not going to look exactly real just yet because I have some light background. But if I just change my layer blend mode from normal to darken, then look at that. It's basically just hair, right? Mm-hmm. So I can hit Control or Command T to transform that. Okay, and I have a real edge from real hair there from just another part of the same image. And by the way, if you don't have enough to sample from the exact image you're working on, like if you can't find a good example of a hair termination that you like, you can just find another stock image that has a hair termination that you do like. Okay? So let's just go ahead and zoom out. So that's one way to take care of it. There we go. So you can see just kind of took care of that little termination there. And then on a new layer, we're just going to go in again with the brush tool. Small brush. And you can see I'm just painting my own terminations in here, doing the best that I can to kind of imitate, you know, added some curls and things like that, doing the best thing that I can to do this. If you want to, by the way, you can also extend your canvas. There are a number of ways. Yeah, there are a number of ways to do that in Photoshop as well. All right, so I've got that hair in there that I just kind of painted. There we go. Let's paint some flyaways in here so it just looks more realistic. And then we just pop in there with the blur tool. You know, give it a little bit of a blur. And you're good to go. So you can also extend your canvas horizontally, but then you have to repaint the whole background and things like that. So definitely not undoable. And Photoshop has come a long way with some of their automatic tools, like cropping with content aware. But for professional work, that'll usually be a starting point, but then you'll have to kind of come in and do a lot of fixing work. And I'm happy to do it, but I don't think we have time. No, it'll probably take like half an hour just to do that. So this is the way that I would approach that. So there's the before and there's the after.
Yeah, Jose says thank you. And he says thank you for the answer, but also reminding us that great painters painted. So that's good.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. The brush tool is like, boom, you got, you know, something's not right in there. And what's nice about the brush tool is if you hit B for the brush tool, you can hold Alt or Option on your keyboard to sample any color. So like if I wanted to paint away one of these polka dots, I could just hold Alt or Option, sample that color right above it. And this is just with the brush tool. Sample that color right there. Lower the flow of my brush so it gets a little bit more smooth. So just sampling. And there are also techniques in Photoshop for copying texture from one area to another as well. You can use things like the healing brush tool to simply copy texture. And there are other more advanced methods of doing the same thing. Just delete that there. Yep. So a lot of the time when I'm doing like retouching faces, things like that, I'm literally just painting a new face with the brush tool. It's surprisingly versatile.
Cool. A little follow-up there from on that earlier question. When you paint in the hair, what are the steps after that? I did mention in the comments that you then typically blur it to hide any of the hard edges, but they were wondering if there's anything you do regarding noise, if the sample area has a different noise from the area that you painted the hair in or sampled the hair to.
Yeah, there's a really good way to match noise in Photoshop. So basically, what we can do is, I'll just do this on a new layer here. Let's just say I did paint I'll repaint one of these polka dots away. There's not a lot of noise in this original image, so this will be more of a theory than, because there's just not a lot of noise in this image. But if there was some noise, then all you have to do, there we go, you can see I can turn this layer off and on. So this is just with the brush tool. It just looks like that, just brush tool. So we can create a new layer. I'm going to hit M for the marquee tool and just select an area like this. I'm going to fill this with gray first. So I'm going to hit Shift Delete, which is my keyboard shortcut for the fill dialog. You can also just go to Edit and down to Fill. Okay, so we're going to fill this with 50% gray, right where it says contents 50% gray. We're just going to fill it with 50% gray. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a smart object, and the reason I'm going to make this a smart object is because I'm going to use a noise filter. And anytime you're going to use a filter, it's a really great idea to use a smart object first, because you can change that filter at any time. So let's just go, it's super easy to do. Just right click on your layer and go to convert to smart object, and now it's a smart object. So very easy to do. Maybe in the future everything will kind of act as a smart object, but we'll see. We'll go to filter, down here to noise, and I'm just going to go to add noise. Okay, and go ahead and bring up the amount. So it's just going to add it to that rectangle. Noise is kind of like the liquify. It needs something to add noise to. So we'll hit OK. So as you can see, I can turn this noise off and on now because it's a smart filter. And now what we're going to do is change this layer from normal to overlay. Okay, because overlay makes medium gray. 50% gray becomes invisible in overlay blend mode. Also soft light, it's invisible. So both of these are invisible. All right. In fact, all of these in here, every overlay, soft light, hard, vivid, linear, pin light, hard mix, all of these make 50% gray invisible. Okay, I'll put it on vivid light just so it's stronger so you guys can see this on the broadcast. So this is set to vivid light. Now, keep in mind, non-destructive. I can turn that noise off and I can put this back to normal. Okay, so add the noise. I'm going to put it on vivid light for now. There we go. Now, the layer underneath it, okay, this layer, I'm going to go ahead, let's just right click on this eyeball. I'm going to make it orange so you guys can see that that's where I painted orange on this layer, right? So now I have noise on a layer right above it. But what happens if I want this noise to only be visible where I painted with my brush tool? Then you can use what's called a clipping mask. Okay, and this is one of the most powerful things in Photoshop because you don't have to actually create a mask. Basically, all you do is right click on this layer and go to create clipping mask. Okay, and as soon as I create a clipping mask, this layer, it bumps over to the right. You can see we get a little down arrow there. And now it's only visible where the layer underneath is visible. Okay, so you can see this noise, I can turn this off and on. I'll zoom in a little bit more. Hopefully everyone can see this in the broadcast. Just turning this noise off and on, it becomes only visible where I paint. And the cool thing is this is totally, it updates in real time. So if I decide to paint more with this too, the noise is still going to be visible wherever I paint on this layer. So I can just keep painting more and I can turn this noise off and on at any time. But it's only going to be visible wherever I paint on this layer. Okay? And now I would do something just like change it to soft light so it's a little bit less harsh, and then double click on add noise, and we'll just take our percentage down to like 5% because you can, every picture is going to have a different amount of noise. So you would want to go in there and double click on add noise and then change the amount of noise afterwards to match it to the original photograph. But I've done this with really, really high levels of precision and matched noise to the degree that you literally cannot tell at all what was the before and after.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's maybe not quite the Photoshop essentials. That's quite a powerful little feature there. But thanks for following up and answering that second part to that question. That's pretty good. Painting and noise now. That's awesome.
Painting and noise. Yeah, happy to do so. Happy to do so. Yeah, anytime you're doing any type of like brush work and things like that, especially if you're in a high texture area, it can be a really good idea to then add texture back over top of it. And for those of you guys looking for, we do that a lot in face retouching. And there's actually a special technique called frequency separation retouching that we do just that for faces. We literally just paint in new faces and then keep the texture. And we have a pro tutorial on frequency separation retouching. So Alistair showed some of Phlearn Pro earlier. It's awesome technique. So if you guys are interested in, like face retouching, I highly suggest it because it's very, very powerful. But the concept is actually kind of similar.
Yeah. Awesome. We should probably move on. We've gone quite a long time on that one. I mean, that's awesome. Such simple features, all done with mostly the brush tool as well. It's kind of cool.
Definitely. And I included more images just for, so I wouldn't run out. But I do want to show you a couple more things on this image because, again, super cool stuff. So the next thing I want to show you guys, I'm going to show you how to use curves in a couple of really interesting ways. Now, curves and levels are actually very, very similar. So you can use these interchangeably. But I want to show you curves, and I want to show you layer masks with this, and then we'll be good. So a curves adjustment layer, if you just grab a point in the middle, you can make a part of your image brighter. If you grab it and make it, bring it down, you can make part of your image darker. Now on the very left-hand side, you can click this point and drag it to the right. It's going to make more of your image black. Okay, it's going to remove your black point, bring it up. It's going to move. It'll basically make your blacks not as dark. So now the darkest part of my image is gray. On the right-hand side, I can do the same thing. I can bring the light levels down, or I can make more of my image white. So I've got a bunch of different controls here within curves. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. This is just something I would very standard do. Pop a little bit of brightness on there, just a tiny bit. And then I basically want to draw some attention to my subject. So we're going to use our layer mask to do that. All right, so to start with, I'm going to hit Control-Command-I. That's going to invert my layer mask. It's going to make it black. So the whole idea with layer mask is that black is invisible, white is visible. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to grab an elliptical marquee tool, select it right around my subject's face. Okay, and then I'm going to hit Control-Command-I on my layer mask again, and that just inverts that layer mask. So now our layer mask is just telling this curves adjustment layer to only be visible there. And you can see I have all this control in the world. I can still make this lighter or darker if I want to. We're just going to make it a little bit lighter. Now what we're going to do, because the edge is super well defined, it's a little too harsh, we just blur it. So filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur, and then just choose like a big radius. You really don't want to be able to see the edge here. Okay, there we go. So we just brighten our subject's face a little bit. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. We're going to grab another curves adjustment layer. This time I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Okay, let's invert our layer mask, and then I'm going to create a bigger circle, okay, and inverse that. So now it's dark in the middle, but again, if you just want to flip layer masks, if it's doing the opposite you want, Control-Command-I. I use that all the time. There we go. And now we'll just add another blur to that as well. Nice large blur, something like that. Looks pretty good. So 2 curves adjustment layers, very simple. But remember earlier, I raised my drawing. Remember earlier where we talked about adding more attention to your subject? That's a super important thing that I always try to do in my editing. So just these 2 layers, let's turn them off and back on again. And you can see just that subtle little difference. And I do this to a lot of my images. There's the before and the after. Can you see how it just draws more attention to our subject now? So the before looks a little bit more flat. My subject's face is a tiny bit dark, just not much, but a tiny bit. And then here in the after, it just changes the whole image to draw more attention to the subject. So this is something that I would highly recommend doing. And keep it subtle. You don't need to crank these sliders too much. You can see I did very subtle adjustments on both, and it made a big difference. Now, the other thing that I want to show you with curves is that you can actually work with colors in curves too. So by default, this little drop down is set to RGB, and this is kind of where most people use curves. And this is fantastic. There's more to it. You can click here and go to red, green, or blue. So if I go to my red channel, I'm going to click here and drag that up, and I'm going to add more reds to my image. If I pull this down, I take away reds, which basically makes it look like we've got more cyan. There we go. Now green, we're going to add green or remove green, which is magenta, and blue channel, same thing. So we're going to add some, sorry, I went to the wrong color channel there. Add blue or take away blue for yellow. So I can use this to color tone my image as well. So here in my blue channel, I'm going to just grab this little point here on the left and pull this up a little bit. And you're going to see it's going to start to put some blue in my shadows, right? Super, super cool effect, really subtle. I'm going to grab this slider on the top right, and we're just going to drag that down a little bit. And that's going to add some warmth into my highlights. So there we go. Just with a curves adjustment layer, I'm color toning my image. Now here in the midtones, I'm going to add some red, just a tiny bit of red into my midtones, and that's going to warm up the skin. There we go. So there's the before and the after with one curves adjustment layer. There's no layer mask on this. It's just affecting my image as a whole. And we've got very fine control over color toning our image. So let's go ahead and group all those together, show you the before and after with that. So there's our before and there's the after. If you're not a fan of color toning, you can just, leave out that step or just reduce it. Don't forget, you can change the opacity. I'm going to put that down to about 50% opacity so it's more subtle. But there's the before and the after with our color toning. And you can see how it gives the image a little bit more of like a polished, kind of more like an artistic feel to it. In my opinion, these are great finishing steps that you can do to just about any photo that are just, they're going to kind of bring it to a level of completion. So let's hold Alt or Option and click on the eyeball here on my base layer, because remember, everything's non-destructive. I still have my original image. So there's our before. This is before we did anything. This is where we started today. And here's our after. So simple steps here, before and after. We first identified our problem areas, just distractions, things we wanted to remove, and then went in and with simple tools like the brush tool, clone stamp, healing brush, simple tools, some curves, we were able to make a big impact on this photo. And yeah, that's pretty much good.
That's great. That's such simple things, but made a huge difference on that last image. In fact, Chile said, wow, that looks like old film emulsions just with a simple curves layer. So yeah, that color toning just really brought all that together. So cool. A couple other comments here I'll give you. Maria says, I've used Photoshop for years, but there's always something new to learn. I'll definitely be experimenting with the 50% gray as a layer for adding noise. So someone got a little tidbit today. That's what it's all about. So thank you for that. Cool. And then a shout out from Sandra, who says, thank you for being so generous with your time and your knowledge. And thanks to SmugMug for hosting. It's our pleasure. And it's great that Arron was willing to come along today. Helen James also shouted out there saying, let me see, what did she says, thank you guys, this was great. So people have been loving it, so that's great.
Fantastic.
And just such simple little things. So, imagine what we'll be able to do when we get Arron back to do another class and some other techniques. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, this is, I feel like, a great foundation. So if if you're on board with a lot of the stuff we did today, those are tools that are going to take you very, very far. And then when it comes to, there's so much that Photoshop has to offer, that a lot of those can be used for, either more advanced techniques or specific use cases and things like that. But again, just like we talked about earlier, a great painter just needs a paintbrush and some paint, and they can create masterpieces. So when you look at Photoshop, keep in mind that those simple tools really can go a long way.
Cool. Yeah, I've just put a little last shout out for questions. If we'll keep them here for a few minutes longer. If you want to get the last couple of questions in, one thing I would like to do is highlight that if you are a SmugMug customer on any of our plan levels, or indeed if you are one of our Flickr Pro customers, then we have sections on both SmugMug and Flickr Pro where we call them our perks pages. And if you go along there, you will find some great discounts from some of our dear friends in industry, including Phlearn. If you get to our perks page, there's a really nice incentive discount there to add some value to those of you who are existing SmugMug or Flickr Pro customers, which is very generous of the team over at Phlearn. We really do appreciate that, Aaron. Thank you for that. Maybe encourage some of you to go over there and check out what we do here at SmugMug and Flickr, smugmug.com or flickr.com. Let's see, has Aaron ever experimented with other Photoshop-like tools such as Affinity or GIMP or other editors? Or
I have.
You have?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would say that you know, I'm I've used Photoshop so much that it's muscle memory at this point that allows me to do things. And I think that that's, in my opinion, that's kind of always the goal with a computer program, right? Is like, instead of like going up to File and trying to find the menu, if you can memorize keyboard shortcuts, you can work fast. So muscle memory is why I keep coming back to Photoshop. But I have used Affinity Photo, and I think it's a great program. I'm really impressed with what they've done. And I've used GIMP in the past. I used GIMP in the early days, and I found it to be just a little bit tough because I was used to some of the features in Photoshop that I didn't find in GIMP. But I have friends who do incredible work with GIMP, and I feel like, you know, as long as you're familiar with your platform and you can get what you need done, then, you know, whatever tool you use is the right tool for you. And there's no reason why cost should be prohibitive. You know, I feel like Affinity did a really great job. It's a one-time fee, so you can pay that for that software and have it forever. And I'm very impressed with Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer. I think they've done a fantastic job. So I'm personally going to continue to use Photoshop for probably the majority of my career because it's just muscle memory at this time. And I'm just, you know, I don't have to think about what I want to do. I just hit the button. But if I was just starting out today, I would most definitely take a look at the suite of programs that's out there and figure out what's the best fit for me. It's like getting a new camera. You know, you hold a Sony in your hands, you hold a Nikon in your hands, you hold a Canon in your hands. Some might feel right, some might not feel the, you know, best match for you. But after you get a feeling of where all the buttons and things are, the tool starts to just become a part of you. And I feel like that's the point that you want to get to. So it's less about which tool you choose. It's more about familiarity with the tool and how that tool just becomes a way for you to create your artwork.
Indeed, muscle memory is. It's hard to move on sometimes when you've invested so much time in learning those places. I've actually thought of what could be a cool episode is maybe get yourself and some other, you know, well-known educators, and we do a quiz about shortcuts and what key does what, and do some blind quizzes where you have to tell us what you can do with the I key or the X key or that type of stuff. That could be fun just to see how much you can do it from memory rather than muscle memory. That could be kind of fun. Right, I think we're going to wrap up there. It's been a very exciting episode, Aaron. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. For those of you who are joining us here on SmugMug live for the first time, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the little bell icon, because that way you will be notified whenever we do another episode. We've got 3 episodes coming up next week, which are going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, check out what we've got coming here on SmugMug Live. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the questions and for your support. We really do appreciate it. Aaron, thank you so much again. And we will see you soon on the next episode of SmugMug Live. Thank you so much. Bye.